Everybody. It's not Bible study without Sam's welcome, so. Sam, I hope to hear you when I die. That's the thing I hear. Woohoo! Yeah. Well, thank you all for braving the cold tonight. It's dropped a couple of degrees at least. Yeah. I was enjoying that little summer weather, and then now it's cold again. But yep, it's winter again. Well, tonight we've got a kind of a challenging text. We're going to finish up chapter 25 and then 35. See, I don't even know what chapter we're in. 35, finish up 35, and then 36, which is a series of genealogies that Moses included. But to finish up kind of this narrative section with Jacob, he has come a long ways, and he is who God wants him to be. It's not a done deal. It won't be until the Joseph story is done. But Jacob, of the generation since Abraham, is living into his name, Israel. And remember his sort of insight into God of El Shaddai, that he has always been with me, and I have walked before him. Very definitely playing into that shepherd image, that the shepherd leads from behind. You know, the sheep sort of follow other sheep, and they'll move forward if the shepherd is behind them. And that is how they will relate to El Shaddai versus later on Yahweh. And God, it's good to point it out, in verse 11, had reinforced his calling, reinforced the power of his name. God says in verse 11, I am El Shaddai. We translate it as God Almighty. It's probably a better translation to say the God that always provides. So he's told to be fruitful and multiply, and you will become a great nation, even many nations. Kings will be among your descendants, and I will give you the land I once gave to Abraham and Isaac. So there is this El Shaddai shepherding moment. Get ready, Jacob. I'm with you, but you are going forward. And then we get to the really hard part, starting with verse 16. So Jacob leaves Bethel, remember the house of God, and this was his first love. This is where he was as a teenager, run away, and he first experienced God. All he had was a stone for a pillow, and God came to him, loved on him, showed him he was more than just a family God. He was a great creator God, and he encouraged Jacob on his journey. Now God has challenged Jacob a little bit with his cheating and lying, and broke him through much of that. But now Jacob is going to lose the love of his life. Leaving Bethel, Jacob and his clan, which is kind of fun now, but when you have 11 sons, we're fixing to have the 12th, plus daughters, plus servants, plus slaves that you just picked up from the Canaanite town you burned down, it's getting to be a pretty large group. But he's leaving Bethel. Jacob and his clan moved towards Ephrath, so they're moving north. But Rachel went into labor while she was still some distance away. Her labor pains were intense. And sort of like any Western movie you've seen, right, when the hard labor starts, we know from ancient texts, people worried about this a great deal. To survive multiple childbirths is difficult in the ancient world. Child mortality is very high. He's been lucky so far, had a lot of kids with a lot of wives, but this is Rebekah's second child. Her labor pains were intense, and after a very hard delivery, the midwife finally exclaimed, "Don't be afraid, you have another son." Which in our culture, rubs a little wrong, right? But remember, in Hebrew, the thing they want above all other is Yahid, my boy, my firstborn, as we get it in the New Testament, only begotten, but their son. It's everything. So definitely speaking into the Bronze Age culture here, she's done it. She's produced another son. And what do you remember about the household relationship between the two sisters and having kids? It was terrible. It was a competition. Between Rachel, remember her name meant the beautiful ewe, the precious kind of sheep. Remember, Hebrew has way too many words for sheep and goats and shepherding. And then, unfortunately, Leah means cow. And she was not described as attractive. So, yeah. But she had most of the sons. So, like that old saying goes, big hips, good for breeding. So, it's talking about cattle, understand. So, speaking of having too many words for things. So, it's been an ongoing struggle, and here you even get the last width of that as we have the last of Rebecca, or Rachel. Rachel was about to die, but with her last breath, she named the baby Ben-Oni, which means child of my struggle. They're translating son of my sorrow, son of my, maybe she's talking about her delivery. Maybe she's talking about the battle that she's had with her sister to win the affection or keep the affection of her husband. But it certainly harkens back to the dark days when all of the sons were being named, Judah. Well, I guess Judah was a good one because we praise God, but, God has seen my suffering and given me a son. I mean, all these very negative things. Now, this should have a particularly poignant moment for us because Jacob himself has just recently gone through a name change, right? Right. He's Israel, sort of both he who struggles with God, but also he who contains, holds, thrives, keeps God. And so mother has given this child the name son of my sorrow. It's going to be bad enough he's going to grow up without mom in kind of a viper's pit of a family. But how would you like that name, right? I'm the last sorrow of my mother. So the depths of Jacob's spiritual growth, I think, come out here. The baby's father, however, called him Benjamin, Ben-Ami, which means son of my right hand, that the strength, strong. He's probably talking about Rachel, that she was his right hand. She was the pillar that kept his life going. So thus is birthed Benjamin. We're at a great disadvantage because these tribes have such long histories, even by the time of Moses. It's like football teams, right? There's a lot when the Eagles beat the Chiefs, right? There's just a lot of water under that bridge, right? And so sometimes we have to get into that mode. The tribe of Benjamin, does that ring any bells for you? What does the tribe of Benjamin do? Exactly. The first king of Israel was Saul, and by historical accounts versus the biblical, even biblically, Saul is always more popular than David. It sort of blows our minds. But remember, David had changed sides and fought for the Philistines for a period of time. The Bible shows us that he's doing this to learn iron working and the strategy of the Philistines. But he really was, especially by the northerners, Israel, seen as a traitor. And so that's one reason the civil war goes as long. David is popular in the south, in Judah, but he's never quite forgiven for joining Goliath's people. So they look forward to Benjamin there. There's a king, the first kings of Israel. There's also at Judges, if you remember the last story in Judges, a very dark episode where Sodom and Gomorrah sort of repeats itself. But in this case, it's not the Canaanites doing it, it's Benjamites. And so a woman is raped and killed in a Benjamite city. So they'll always call Benjamites left-handed in Hebrew, which means that they're the rotten little brother, the dishonest of us. And there's actually a war where the other tribes will attack Benjamin. So all that is obviously very much in the future, but readers over the centuries would have sort of brought all this in, that in a sense, Benjamin is the author of a lot of sorrow. But the huge thing you need to get here is what Dad has done. Did Dad ever change the name of any of his other sons? No. He has looked at this child and seen this hard situation. Remember, God sort of sets him up. I'm El Shaddai. I lead you like a shepherd. And so, get ready. And then it happens. This moment he's probably feared his whole life. And instead of being broken, being crushed, being furious, taking it out on the child, he has this newfound tenderness. He knows what it's like to grow up as Yaakov, the cheater, the liar. That was my name. Everybody assumed I was a heel grabber. I'm not going to do that. And he's learned sort of the power of having your name in the book of life that we'll say later on. My purpose in life is to fulfill the name God has for me, not the circumstances surrounding my birth or whatever argument the mothers may have had with each other. So Benjamin enters into Hebrew, into the name of the tribes. Still today in Israel, you will see it's a very, very popular name. The prime minister today, Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah. So I don't think he's of the tribe of Benjamin, but he certainly has that name. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath. So again, we had this reference, and someone parenthetically has added, where is Ephrath? Yeah. Now that would not have meant a great deal at the time of Jacob, but certainly for us reading later on, the town of David, the capital of Judah, and birthplace ultimately of Jesus. House of Life, yeah, Bethlehem. So sort of the difference of town names, what the Canaanites call it, and then later when Israel settles there. So Jacob set up a stone monument over Rachel's grave, and it can still be seen there to this day. In fact, we know from Samuel that they'll still say, we saw her grave. So this is the standing stones, the matzavot that we've talked about before. When someone of great significance to you passes, or you have an experience with God, they'll erect these stones. Still today, with Jewish cemeteries, and see it in Israel, they'll still bring stones to a grave to mark someone touched their life. But Jacob, I think of all generations up to this point, has gotten it. God is with him. He has this ability to take something that's hard and painful, and he's trying to make it good. Unfortunately, he's not always been this way, and his sons have seen him not at his best. How does he feel about his sons right now with what we've gone through with Dinah? He's afraid of them, although he's challenged them. He's tried. Remember his sons, not the oldest, we'll see him in a minute, but the next two that were Dinah's full-blood brothers, tricked the Canaanites that had raped Dinah, and they convinced him to be circumcised to join God, and they lied. The classic Abraham lie. And then they turned on them, and they slaughtered the men in the town, and then they took the women and children as slaves and took their wealth. So Jacob has challenged them, and he brought him back to Ethel. He's trying to bring him back, but there's still a lot to do. So then verse 21, Jacob traveled on and camped beyond Migdal Eder. Don't know where that is. Migdal is the word for fortress or fort. While he was living there, Reuben, in Hebrew, Yada, he knows Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Jacob soon heard about it. Okay, so we got to go back a little bit. Remember, there's two wives, Rachel, that Jacob really loved, and Leah, and each one of them had a servant wife. And it sort of breaks it down for us again in verse 23. So the sons of Leah were Reuben, and this is the guy that's just done this. He's the oldest. He is to receive a double portion, right, of the inheritance. But then we have Simeon and Levi, and these were the guys that murdered everybody in the town, murdered the men. You have Judah. In just a couple of chapters, we're going to read about Judah's escapade with a Canaanite prostitute that ends up being his daughter-in-law. So, Issachar and Zebulun. So that's Leah's sons. And sort of the dominant pack. Verse 24, Rachel's sons, Joseph and Benjamin. We just heard about him. They're younger. And how's it going to go for those guys? Yeah, that's sort of our closing story. Then the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servants, were Dan and Naphtali. And these will be smaller tribes. Dan is the furthest north tribe. And then the sons of Zilpah, Leah's servants, were Gad and Asher. Popular name in our sound booth. Again, relatively minor tribes. But these are the names of the sons who were born to Jacob at Paddan Aram, which is northeast, back where the family came from. So, we go back to Reuben. Reuben sleeps with his father's concubine. This specifically was his mother's servant. So you've got that connection. Why? I think Moses is like us. He doesn't really want to talk about it, but he wants it to be recorded, what Reuben did. Do we know anything else about Reuben? Has he been mentioned before? Remember the mandrake episode? He was a young boy, and they found mandrakes out when they were working in the fields. And, you know, a mandrake tends to look like a male member. And so the Hebrews and ancient Near Eastern people in general think it's a means to produce male heirs. And so it tells you in kind of an embarrassing way how much the competition between the two mothers had affected here this little boy, that he Mama, you know, I got this for you. See, you can win. You can have a son, and you can get back at Leah. And we had that embarrassing exchange, the bold statements. Leah's trying to steal the mandrake, and they say, Rachel says to her, how can you take my son's mandrake? It was really embarrassing and hard. And so we see that it's affected him. What it seems like he's doing, and remember, Moses likes to do this. He wants us to engage with the text. It's not that he is out of control, although that's possible, but he is making sure that this secondary wife, this concubine, doesn't rise. With her mistress gone, is Bilhah maybe going to become the challenge to him or his siblings? It really seems to reek of this family rivalry. Again, like we say, the Bible never openly condemns polygamy, but every time it describes it, it's a nightmare. And, this is front and center. So we're going to hear a little bit more about Reuben along the way, but except for the sandwich, you probably haven't heard much about him, right? He is not going to retain his firstborn status. He will be replaced. And it's sort of this earth-shattering thing that God does, because at the end of the day, God does not care about birth order as much as he cares about the contents of your heart. Who replaces Reuben as the firstborn? Joseph. And the way they do it is they elevate Joseph's two sons to the status of tribes. Joseph, in a sense, is our destination, where we've gone. His life will not be easy either, but he discovers this thing that Genesis has been driving us towards, how, in his words, speaking to his brothers, to take the evil that you have done, but God made it good. That's what God loves. This family's capable of it, but it's also capable, we've seen, of horrible things too. And who has just modeled that? Who has just done that? Taken something that was hard, evil, and tried to make it good? Jacob, by the use of the names. Losing Rachel had to be his greatest pain, but he's not going to let that mark Benjamin for his whole life. So Jacob has come a long ways. We're not there, but he's doing a good job here. He's going to struggle a little bit in the future. So let me stop there. Are we doing okay? Now remember, Moses, our great writer here, he's not writing a biography like we would expect. He's not just giving you the story in a narrative way, and then this happened, then this happened. Moses is very much a product of Bronze Age literature. He's acting like a scribe, I would argue very much an Egyptian scribe, and he is including the other sources that he has. He's done this to us before. He'll switch gears, and we sort of move out of his narrative telling of the story, and we pick up other sources that he has. Either people have related this to him, he's found it in writing. Through all of this, I want to stress, God is helping him. God is the editor, right? Where he's weaving different sources together. This gives it validity in an ancient way, but for us, it gets confusing. We're going to jump into now 3 different genealogies, and they don't all match. Okay? In our mind, this is not good. If you're writing a research paper, right, you're not going to quote 3 sources that don't necessarily agree with each other. You'll get marked off. But what I love about Scripture, and I love about what Moses does, if he is not sure, he includes it all. It's sort of, I feel God's hand in this. I can't explain it all, but I'm going to include it. And so part of what Moses is doing, and again, we've seen him do this over and over, he wants us to ask questions. These next genealogies are of Esau's descendants. Now, who is Esau? He's the older brother. This is not the line that produces Jesus. This is not the line that produces Israel. This is that crazy, hairy, weirdo, not so bright brother that becomes sort of the para-Israel. I mean, it's outside. These are not Jacob's people. I mean, why don't continue the story with Jacob? That's who Moses is writing to. Why Esau? We read last week a little bit that Moses' generation will encounter the Edomites, they become known as. So Esau, hairy, produces Edom. Dom is red. It's like Adam. He's the red soil. So these Edomites are right, either outdoorsy kind of shepherds, or maybe there was a red complexion, hair color, we don't know, but they relate him to red. Why else would we spend all this time, and we're going to spend a little bit of time here, why else would Moses want us to read about Esau's descendants?
Because God said he would bless us.
That's exactly right. And I think this would have been shocking for Moses' generation, because remember, the Edomites in the day of Moses said, you can't come through our land. Never. We will attack you. We will raise our army and try to stop you. You cannot come. We're not related anymore. And so their natural tendency is to make them villains. But Moses is saying, no, we have to remember these are people under the covenant of God as well. We had a lot of children born to Abraham that were not God's intent. They were people's bad choices, but God still loved them and still took care of them. We're going to see kings that come from Esau's line before Israel, and they're Esau's descendants. And what kind of guy was Esau to Jacob at the end? He was a good guy. He had grown a lot too. And there was that little window, and the rabbis loved to point it out, that it seems like God was working in Esau's life at the same time he was working in Jacob. So just like generations before, God had taken care of Ishmael. In fact, you'll see a little connection here. Taking care of Ishmael's descendants, even though Abraham and Sarah had tried to kill them twice, God still took care of them. God is the only hero, ultimately, in these stories. Sometimes his family does good, sometimes it does bad. But let me finish up 27. And please, this gets confusing because we get off-road. In English, we just want to read this as a natural continuation of the story, but they don't, especially starting in 27, it doesn't seem to be in the chronological order. So Jacob returned to his father Isaac in Mamre. Suddenly Isaac is alive? I thought he was dead. We talked about him. Isn't he dead? Why? Where's he been? The two brothers, shouldn't he have been involved? This is why we think it was another time period. But back in Mamre, which is in Kiriath Arba, now called Hebron, and so another hugely important city where Abraham and Isaac had both lived as foreigners. Isaac lived for 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died at ripe old age, joining his ancestors in death, which is that great Hebrew phrase, to be gathered unto my forefathers. And it sounds very spiritual, but unfortunately it means they gather their bones all together in the same cave. Yeah. So that this is, the original homestead, still heavenly fought over in the world today. There's not many Jews left in Hebron, several hundred. That's about it. And then they add, and his sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him, which Sunday we're dealing with the commandment to honor your mother and father. And, on one hand, it's a very simple thing, right? It's 10 commandments, that's baby stuff. But
It had to be after Jacob came back because he helped bury him.
he did, right. But is it before Benjamin died? Is it before the Canaanite? We're not sure. I mean, and that's the most honest. I'm not sure that Moses was sure. either he's heard conflicting things, maybe God has said something, I don't know. But it is particular that the sons are not near the father, and that their resolution was not involving Isaac. It's very strange. But maybe he was too old. I mean, he's 180 years old. He's in the equivalent of a nursing home. I don't know. He should have been with one of the sons. This is what I mean. It's like we've come off the road and we're off-road here. It's a little bit of a challenge. But chapter 36, Moses really wants us to think about Edomites. So let me show you a quick video that will just give us a little bit of review of what we've known. And there's something huge that happens in the New Testament with Edomites. Yeah, you know what it is? Okay.
The Edomites, who lived in the region of modern Jordan and southern Israel, are an almost forgotten ancient kingdom. Today this area is known for the famous UNESCO World Heritage and Archaeological Site of Petra, the Rose Red City.
Which
Now,
incidentally,
the
they had
Hebrew
nothing
word
to do with
Edom
Petra.
Means
It's
red,
just where they used to
and
live.
relates to the name of its founder Esau, the firstborn son of the patriarch Isaac and his wife Rebekah.
So they've given him red hair.
Isaac and Rebekah had twin sons, and the brothers had a tumultuous relationship from birth. The Hebrew Bible tells us that Esau was a hunter, while his twin brother Jacob helped his mother around the home tent. As a young adult, Esau sold his firstborn birthright to the family inheritance to his brother Jacob for a bowl of red pottage. This caused friction between the brothers, and the Bible tells us that the nations of the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob, often clashed. These conflicts between Israel and Edom, Babylon and Egypt are recorded in the Bible. In fact, Edom and the Edomites are mentioned some 130 times in the Bible. Some of the more well-known ones are: 1. God blessed Esau because he was a descendant of Abraham. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. This was the land to the south and east of the Dead Sea, and became known as the land of Edom. 2. There was enmity between Esau and Jacob. 3. The Israelites had been traveling through the wilderness from Egypt to the Promised Land. But when the Israelites asked the Edomites if they could travel through their land, they were refused passage. 4. In the days of Saul, Edom was controlled by Israel. 5. King David had a military victory over Edom and established garrisons in Edom. 6. The Edomites revolted and became independent of Israel. 7. The prophet Jeremiah spoke against Edom. 8. Mount Seir was the center of the Edomites, and the prophet Ezekiel said, "Set your face against Mount Seir, on the eastern side of the Jordan River." 9. The prophet Amos spoke against Edom for pursuing Israel with the sword. 10. The prophet Isaiah spoke about vengeance against the nation of Edom. And finally, 11. Obadiah, the minor prophet, prophesied that Edom would be destroyed. The Nabateans conquered the Edomites around 312 BC, and now the region is mostly occupied by Bedouins and military outposts.
That's
The
probably good.
Edomites were
So he does a good job of getting us through the rest of the Old Testament. And it's hard. It really is hard to learn these various groups. But Edom is one you want to hold on to, because this is where it gets confusing. The Edomites are Hebrews. They're not Israelites, but they're Hebrews because they're descendants of Abraham, descendants of Aver. So they are, in a sense, part of the covenant, but they are not of the line that will produce Jesus, and they're not Jews, they're not Israelites. So it's this sort of gray area, and you definitely have Moses surprising his audience with what God is saying about the treatment of these Edomites, these red-headed guys. What is Israel's function? I mean, why is God blessing this family? What's their purpose? To be a priest for the nations. They are to be the lighthouse that brings the world to God, and it works. I mean, we're sitting here, and it's, in a sense, beginning even with the other tribes. Some of Israel's greatest struggles initially are with relatives. I mean, the Moabites are descendants of Lot. That would be a struggle. They'll struggle with the Edomites as well. You saw some of that. But it's going to come to a particular head in the New Testament. The Edomites, like Israel, are nearly destroyed in the, sort of the genocidal wars that go on in the late period, towards the end of the Old Testament. First Assyria, and then Babylon, and then Persia. They're wiping out whole groups of people. And the Edomites, like the Judeans and the Israelites before them, are nearly wiped out. But a small section of them do manage to survive. They're not taken into exile. They're not seen as valuable as the Judeans were. So the small pocket out in the deserts remains. They will enter into the New Testament period and suffer under the Greeks as well. But Judah, when they come back from exile, encounters the Edomites again. Now, the problem is we change languages. So we jump, of course, from Hebrew into Greek. And so the names are hard enough in Hebrew, but you switch what they call them in Greek, and Edomite becomes Idumeans. So there's a famous Idumean king of Judah. His name is Herod. I don't think Moses knew all this. I think God helping Moses with all this. But there is going to be a confrontation of the two brothers again, if you will, Jacob and Esau, between Jesus and Herod. So this is why the Jews were upset that their king was an Edomite. He was an Idumean. They're Hebrews, sure, but they're not Israelites, and they certainly are not Jews. Right. So sort of an expanding family lineage here. So, and I probably should do this on the screen, but so if you are a descendant, I'm going to say Abraham. It's really Aver we talked about, but if you're a descendant of Abraham, they consider you a Hebrew. So you're part of the initial covenant. And again, you understand God as El Shaddai or Kel Shaddai, and you have this more nomadic sort of experience. And then we see the line pass through Jacob, Esau. So if you're a descendant of Israel, Jacob, you're an Israelite. So an Israelite is a Hebrew, but they're also an Israelite. An Israelite is different than from a Hebrew. Well, I mean, they are Hebrew, but you can be a Hebrew and not be an Israelite, because you're a later descendant of Jacob. No, Jews are only the descendants of the tribe of Judah. So we go from Israel's 12 sons, sort of, and then we go to the 12 tribes. Basically, every one of those tribes, except for Judah, is wiped out. And so it's just the descendants of Judah today, Yehuda, that are the Jews. So Jews are Israelites and they are Hebrews. They're the only ones that can claim, in a sense, all three of those. Yeah, this is more of a racial genealogy than it is a religion. We will see some Hebrew worship apart from Moses, but most of the time it's being corrupted. You'll see it even tonight with the descendants of Esau, that they don't hold enough to the religion of the time of Esau. They'll start to be Canaanites for the most part. So I would call them Hebrews, but they're not necessarily following the faith of the Bible. It's a family lineage. Yeah, it's complex. I mean, there is definitely a racial component, that you're a family that are descendants of Israel. We're not in the picture yet. Actually, there's a small hint of maybe some Europeans tonight, if we get through these genealogies. But yeah, I mean, this was not our rodeo. Our people were naked, running around the forests of Europe, smearing blue paint on ourselves and doing terrible things. And we thought we were bee's knees. And
So Jesus was a descendant of Judah.
yes. Right. So he's a Hebrew, he's an Israelite, he's a Jew. Yeah. And then Semitic is a whole bigger category because the Canaanites, but we're getting there. We're getting the pieces separated out. But please don't lose the point that even though the blessing, if you will, or the title to the land is going to go through Israel and then the 12 tribes and then Judah, it doesn't mean God has given up on others. Again, we learn in the New Testament, his goal is that everybody is going to be saved. But he's beginning one family, one tribe, and go from there. And I think Moses does know that. One of the things Moses shares, it's a little strange, in Deuteronomy is a command about treating the Edomites well. Can we throw up that Deuteronomy passage? So God speaking to Moses, this is later in Moses' life, he's sort of giving instructions on how to live. And he tells them, do not detest, don't hate the Edomite or the Egyptian. That's something. Again, because the Edomites, we got all this story, and then the Edomites are hostile to him when they get there. And the Egyptians, oh my God, these are people that enslaved us. Why should we not hate them? Well, because the Edomites are your relatives. We come from Jacob, they come from Esau. They were brothers. They're people of the covenant as well. And you lived as foreigners among the Egyptians. And so as hard as it is for them to hear this, and to me it's proof that God is saying it. My goal is not to pick my favorite team and then have everybody else lose. My goal is to use you to change the world. There are restrictions to this. There are other groups of people, like the Canaanites, that God says don't have anything to do with them. Remember, these are other Semites, but they worship Mother Earth and Baal, the storm god, and they worship trees, and they're tree huggers, and they sacrifice babies, and they have prostitutes all over the place. So we don't mess with them. But continuing on, the third generation of an Edomite and Egyptian may enter the assembly of the Lord. So they're saying that if you intermarry with an Egyptian or an Edomite, they can become Jewish, Israelite, Hebrew. They can become part of this, which in their tribal system was very unusual. They don't, I mean, who do they like to marry? Each other, cousins, because you keep it in the tribe, you keep it in the clan. So these commands from Moses were very strange. But again, it speaks of ultimately the gospel, that it's to include everybody. But let's try to dive into this set of genealogies. Again, to me, this is great proof that this is really a Bronze Age document. You know, it wasn't written after the exile. It wasn't written later. For them, genealogies were everything. If I can know your parents and where you came from, I can know your character. And so they love them. We hate them. You know, unless you have some app on your phone or do ancestor research, we really don't know beyond our grandparents who's anybody. So we're a very different kind of society, but they love them. So look how 36 starts. This is the account. And I almost can see Moses sitting at his desk holding another papyrus saying, so this thing right here that I have tells me these are the descendants of Esau. Someone has added, Esau is also Edom. So I know it's confusing. We go from hairy guy to red people. But it's really fun to read this in Egyptian. Do you know what the Egyptians call the Edomites? Edomites. So again, you know, Egyptian texts that have nothing focused on the Bible confirm that these people really existed, and they called them the same thing. It's just like the Moabites. The Egyptians call them Moabites. But Esau married 2 young women from where? Now we knew this. This was part of the problem. This is why Jacob's mom sort of favored him, and she helped in this weird family dynamic. The dad liked Esau, and mom liked Jacob, and that conflict because he had married these Canaanites. Remember, in terms of ethnicity, they are the same people, same language, but they just worship very, very different gods. And almost immediately, you get a sense of that. Ada, the daughter of who? Elon Musk. So yeah, that's the same name. It's not Elon Musk. It's Elon the Hittite. We talked about this before. The Hittites are from Turkey, which would be far to the north. They are kind of, at this point, mercenary-ish people. We'll see later on in the Iron Age under David that he just flat out hires mercenaries from the Hittites. Uriah, Bathsheba's original husband, was one of these Hittites. They're famous for being chariot drivers. They have long hair. They like to braid them. They fought the Egyptians quite a bit. So it's a person from not around here. This is not a Canaanite, it's not a Hebrew, it's someone that came from north. But he seems to have assimilated into Canaanite society. So it's strange that she's a daughter of the Hittite. And then we have this name, and I don't know if God is doing this to me on purpose, but this is twice this week in 2 Bible studies. So probably the worst name in Hebrew you possibly could imagine. Oholivah Ma. Oholivah Ma. It is a horrible name and what it means in Hebrew. If you were in men's Bible study, you know what I'm talking about. We can flip over to Ezekiel. Ezekiel 23. So Ezekiel has received a message from God, kind of a parable where God is talking about he has married 2 prostitutes. So this message came from the Lord, Son of Man, referring to Ezekiel. Once there were 2 sisters who were daughters of the same mother. Continuing on, they became prostitutes in Egypt. Even as young girls, they allowed men to fondle their breasts. It's terrible in Hebrew. The older sister was named Oholah, and her sister was here's another one, Oholivah. I married them, and they bore me sons and daughters. I'm speaking of Samaria and Jerusalem, for Oholah is Samaria, and Oholivah is Jerusalem. So remember, the tribes will divide themselves after the death of Solomon. And it's in part because of David. I mean, it's this north-south split. All of the northern tribes don't want any part of David's kingdom. And they certainly don't want any descendant of David to rule them. So they form in the north and they become Israel, also called Samaria by their capital, and then Judah in the south. First, in 721, Israel is destroyed, the northern kingdom, by Assyria. And then for a period, about a century, Judah is the only kingdom left. So both the north and south of the Israelite kingdoms are sort of being condemned here. So Oholah, or Oho, means tent. And it's a very derogatory term for female anatomy. So I'll just leave it there. So they're playing off of that, and it would have been shocking, as it is, I'm sure, right now, to read that this is one of the women that Esau his descendants are becoming involved in. This back in Genesis, I cannot say this, Oholivama. I don't know. It means something like a tent shrine, which would be a very sexual place. So Moses, by these names, is telling us what's happening. I mean, Esau was a pretty good dude, certainly got better, but he's off on his own. Isaac is gone. Jacob is not there by his own choice. So the brothers are separated. Just like that's happened to Jacob's sons, they begin to interact with the people around them. They're not marrying within the tribe. I mean, the way this should have worked is Esau's sons should have married into Jacob's with daughters. They should have been together, but they're not. And all sorts of Joe, Dick, and Harrys are showing up, and it's getting dark. So I don't have time tonight to go through all of it, but we'll do a little bit. So the daughter of Anah and the granddaughter of Zibeon, the Hivite. Now this is, you asked earlier, this is a remote possibility of our inclusion here. I know this is another group of people to learn. Hivites, we believe, are Hurrians. Hurrians were nomadic people that came from the north and sort of pressed down into Syria, but especially moved into Turkey. The Egyptians talk about this, and the Egyptians will fight them. These Hurrians are Indo-Europeans. So they are very distant ancestors. Now, it's so distant that half of this tribe goes into India and half of it goes into Europe. And this is a linguistic term. I mean, our English is actually descended from the language that the Hurrians would have spoken. But there's a lot of history that goes on before that. The Hurrians had been a kind of regional power in Syria, but had been much more powerful than any Canaanite or really even the Hittites at this point, any Hebrew. But the Egyptians sort of reached their zenith of their empire, and they destroy these Hurrians. The Egyptians call them Mitanni, and there's a lot of chariot battles. The Egyptians talk about defeating these Hurrians. So again, great detail. Moses would have understood very quickly what a Hurrian was, and so he has this source. It's sprinkling into all nationalities that they're familiar with. But then, verse 3, and I think you guys will get this, he also married his cousin, Basemat. Now that's a good thing, right? That's what they would have expected. And so, sort of like every other member of this family, he makes two bad decisions and a good decision. But where would Esau find a cousin? Potentially with Jacob, but it can also be a descendant of Abraham. What other sort of dispossessed Hebrews are running around out there? Ishmael. Isn't that kind of neat? He also married his cousin, Basemat, who was the daughter of Ishmael. Remember, Ishmael is the daughter, or is the son of Sarah's Egyptian maid. Her name Hagar, usually it means like servant. She's probably Keturah, if you remember all that, which is an Egyptian name. And she marries Abraham after the death of Sarah. But it was bumpy going for a long time. Sarah wanted Hagar to have a child, and then when she did, she hated it and tried to drive her off in the desert to die. And who interrupted? God. So he will save Ishmael and Hagar twice, telling her that he would make a nation of her too. So in a sense, God has been taking care of all these extra kids for a long time. And it's a tender thing that Esau can reach out and in some ways make this connection. Basemat seems to be a reference to spices, which in this region, copper and trade routes are the name of the game. They're still obviously doing a lot of shepherding work, but they seem to be getting involved in trade as well. So verse 4, Adah gave birth to a son named Eliphaz for Esau. So we stop and look at names. So this is where you guys showed me you're learning some Hebrew. What do you notice about the name Eliphaz? El. Yes, very good. And what kind of El? What's the I? It's always nice when they say I, like Eleazar. My El, my El. So that's just what the I means after. But Phaz is gold. So we're not quite sure how to translate this. My God is gold? My God is golden? Do they mean money, give me money? Or there's a sense where the gods are golden. Remember, El is a very slippery term for us. It certainly is El Shaddai. It's the God that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have known, but it's also the God of the Canaanites. And we know that El is very different. So Hebrews would use El. They don't know Yah yet. They don't know Yahweh yet. So there's that. So we don't know. We hope that despite some of her background, Canaanite background, that the El in Esau's son is the El that has been good to his family, but we just don't know. Basemat gave birth to a son named Ruel, which is a funny name. This is a more popular name. It shows up several times in Scripture. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, Yitro, his real name is Ruel. Ruel. Yitro is his priestly title, but it's something like El will pasture. Remember when I say they're too much of a shepherd language? We think it's a word for friend. That if you let someone pasture on your land, it's a friend. So God is my person I let pasture. I don't know how to translate this name. But again, you have the El reference. So that seems to be, at least for the first Canaanite wife. And then we go to verse 5. Here's my bane again. Oholivma. That's got an A in it, though. Oholivama. I don't know. She gave birth to a son, Yush. which seems to come from the Hebrew word to help. So he that comes to help. And then we have Yalam, which means to hide. Okay. And Korah, which is a name that shows up quite a bit in Moses' writing, although no relation here. And it either means bald, which is usually how we translate in Hebrew. Some people argue it can also mean like ice or cold. But most of the time it seems like it's baldy. So, and then we have all these sons were born to Esau in the land of Canaan. So the land that God promised, but in his case it may have a darker connotation. Esau took his wives, his children, his entire household, along with the livestock, and what does he have? Cattle. You will not, in the time of Moses, see any Edomite with cattle. So this is sort of the inheritance still of Abraham, that they have these incredibly valuable cattle in places that they can hardly keep them alive. So he's got a lot of wealth. He doesn't have the mention of the camels, which I would have liked. But remember, his brother probably gave him all of his camels, at least 30 females. And so he's pretty wealthy. And then they add for us all the wealth he had acquired in the land of Canaan. And he moved away from his brother, Jacob. There was not enough land to support them both because all the livestock and possessions they had acquired. So again, this is the sort of curse of stuff that's haunted Abraham's family ever since he left Egypt with the great booty of Sarah's dowry from Pharaoh. And it forced Abraham to separate from Lot because, Israel doesn't have rolling hills of green, not in the south where they're living. It'll rain in places, and so the shepherds have to move and find places where the rains have come, but they'll go over a lot of barren desert to get there. So these lands are hard, especially on cattle. In fact, I have never seen cattle graze in Israel. I've seen them in farms, but you never, like we have cattle out here. I mean, the brave ranchers, maybe our cattle are a little tougher, but stuff is getting in the way of being close to his brother. So again, verse 8, they're telling us, so Esau, also known as Edom, it's probably confusing even for Moses' generation, settled in the hill countries of Seir. And this is the land that he was given. It's always sort of the capital of the Edomite lands. They are semi-nomadic, even late into the Old Testament period. So they're still moving with their flocks. The Israelites and the Judeans later will definitely be city people. They've come out of Egypt, living in kind of the metropolis area of the Delta, and they're not holding sort of the lifestyle of Abraham's previous generation. All right. I guess I better stop there. We got a little bit more to go, but we will pick up. About mules, making mules. It's one of the claims of fame. But the main points to hold on to these genealogies, as hard as they are for us to piece our way through, they are showing, one, that God is still trying and still blessing. But it seems like bad decisions that are being made. They are intermarrying with Canaanites, other foreigners, but they're also making some good choices. So it's not bad, but it's going to get bad. So we know by Herod's day, it's really bad. Edomians hate Jews, and Jews hate Edomians by then. So. Yeah. Yeah, it's much like life. God teaches us this is not a good idea, but then we look at the prestige and the desire and the want, and it's very prestigious for these patriarchs to have multiple wives. Yeah, that's a long conversation. Part of it is God. Part of it is in reference to honoring a God. They think if you invoke elements of the God's name, that will become a destiny for your child and will bless your child. Yes. And this is one of the things I really always encourage when you do a Bible study. It's so tempting just to read a name and think, well, okay, well, that's just a name that you can't pronounce, right? But Moses and Samuel both do this a lot. There is so much meaning oftentimes in the name. Like we talked about, Caleb, Caleb. Well, it means dog. There's a huge story behind that. There's a guy named Nahal who David steals his wife. His name is Fool. They're intentionally telling us things with these names. And again, they want you to find your name, right? We all have a name to learn, so to speak. So. That is a beautiful question. Okay, why didn't God talk about eternity or heaven? And the most honest answer is because they're not Gentiles. Gentiles care about heaven. Afterlife is super important. If he had an Egyptian there, you better believe he'd talk about heaven, because that's all the Egyptians thought about. But these are not Egyptians, they're Semites. Most important to them is what? Son. That's the only immortality they're really focused on. Now, certainly God has a plan, and he's taken it other places, and God blesses us beyond just what we ask for. Hallelujah. But, including them, exactly. But they were more interested in sons and land and stuff, right? And so he's really speaking into their culture, but he's moving them towards the bigger picture. You know, that phrase, I'm gathered under my forefathers, will come to have very different meaning. But realize, in the beginning, the Hebrews didn't really worry about an afterlife. It wasn't, Rachel just died, and did he ask anything? Take her to heaven. It's not, it's very strange for us because we're Gentiles. They didn't know how to be what? No, they don't, absolutely. That's why the law comes. There's a lot of instruction, and Jacob doesn't have a lot to go on. A couple generations of his father and grandfather having a relationship. But even Canaanites in that Semitic religion, they're not really focused on the afterlife either.
But there wasn't that talk in the garden either.
Agreed. A little bit about death, right? That you can avoid it, but this is hard to say because Judaism is much like Christianity. There's a lot of different blends and sides. They're not monolithic. But I would say across the board, sort of with many Jews, heaven is still not a big issue. It's not, they don't think about it as much as we do. And that's just, it's different. The covenant, their behavior, yeah, they look down on us sometimes because they think God has to reward you. At one point in Deuteronomy, God tells them, if you follow all of the law, and I've actually been told this by several Israelis, if you do everything that God asks, your reward is rain. Is rain. And I'm like, rain? I want eternal life. Forget about rain. But again, for them, it's the covenant, it's the land, it's God's presence, his blessing. It's different. But sorry, question over here.
I just want to make sure I'm making the connections correctly. Didn't Esau marry his cousin wife because Jacob was sent to find a cousin? Or am I confusing something?
No, you're exactly right. We read that earlier so that to try to make his mama happy. We got a little snippet of that earlier on. Yeah. But I think it's one step in the right direction and we made two in the wrong direction. Yeah. Question. No, they're Semitic languages, so Arabic is distantly related to Hebrew, but no, there's no connection that I know of. I don't speak Arabic, so I don't know. I always hate when authors try to prove Hebrew words and they'll start quoting Arabic. And it's like saying, this word means this in Spanish because in French it means, I'm like, that doesn't work, people. Just because they're ancient languages doesn't mean they, so anyway. So I'm sorry, we've run over. So any last questions? Would you have joined this family if you had known all this before? Question, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes. And I wonder about that. I do a lot. Even with Samuel, we see him doing that. But it also could be, growing up in El Paso, we were a cotton farming community on the west side, and so it was a small community. And as a boy, I remember this older gentleman named Bo Weevil. And to this day, I don't know what his real name was, but everybody called him Bo Weevil. And it was not a nice name, right? But he went by Bo Weevil. So I think it's a little bit like that, that people, we give nicknames, so. Yes. Yes. And they really shouldn't, in Hebrew culture, be the one naming them. So, anyway, let's pray real quick. Father, our God, we thank you when it gets weird and deep that you love Edomites and you still love us. Father God, we know even though we were not on the radar of anybody we talked about tonight, we're still in your heart. And we didn't even know the things to ask for, and yet you still planned them for us. Help us, O Lord, to hold on to this as we realize that even today, we don't know what to pray for. We don't know what we really need or want. We think we do. But we trust your Spirit. We trust you. We want to live the life that you would have for us in the hard times, in the good times, in the marrying times, in the burying times. We want to be close to you so that in eternity we can continue to be close to you. Help us, Father, as we continue this journey. It started so long ago,